Of all the cards that I expected Konami to build an archetype around, this was not one of them. Based off of Mythical Beast Cerberus that came out way back in 2006 in the TCG, 12 years later came a set called Extreme Force, and with it came an archetype of 8 cards based off of this one card. Whatever drove Konami to choose this card over all others to build an archetype around, I'll never know. But in all honesty, I'm really glad that they did. The deck's gimmick revolves around generating spell counters, something that for whatever reason has been really fun to play for me, and this generates them like nothing else. Just don't play the original card the deck is based off because, well, it's from 2006. Outdated is an understatement. So, as always with the Deck Dossier series, we're going to break this bad boy down to discuss and analyse exactly what this deck is about. In this video, we will discuss how the deck works, what its strengths and weaknesses are, as well as covering tech choices and other deck building decisions that need to be made when piecing it all together. Additionally, at the end of the video, there will be a deck profile and replays that highlight how the deck plays and reacts to certain situations. Now, as I said before, the original card the archetype is based around is outdated. However, its retrain is basically the MVP of this deck. I am talking, of course, about Mythical Beast Master Cerberus, and here we can see how the effects of the Mythical Beast archetype works. Their pendulum effects can only trigger if there's not another scale active on your field, and they will always destroy themselves to activate this pendulum effect, whatever that may end up being, and all of the pendulum effects have a once per turn per monster clause. All of the monsters also have at least 2 monster effects. One that places a number of spell counters on the card if a spell is activated, including pendulum scales since they're treated as spells, and then an additional effect which can make use of those counters and others that are on your field. So let's start with Master Cerberus. A beefy level 8 with a 2800 stat line, its pendulum effect can add a level 7 or lower mythical beast from deck to hand upon destruction. As a monster, it gains 2 counters when a spell is activated, and when there are 4 or more counters on him, he cannot be destroyed by any effects. Master Cerberus is also able to remove 4 counters from anywhere on the field to target it and banish any monster your opponent controls, then gain its attack until the end of your opponent's turn. You can immediately see why this guy is the MVP of the deck. You'll often use the pendulum effect to search Jackal King to resummon Cerberus, and from there his monster effects come into play. Destruction resistance is nothing to sneeze at, and the banish effect will 9 times out of 10 lead to an OTK in my experience. He's the focus of the deck for sure, and with that searching power, 3 is absolutely necessary as he's your play starter and boss monster all in one. Next is the aforementioned Mythical Beast Jackal King, a monster that comes in clutch more often than you would think. Its pendulum effect allows you to summon a face-up Mythical Beast monster from the extra deck upon destruction besides itself, which is how you get back the Master Cerberus that you used to search it if you didn't have a Jackal King in hand already. Its monster effect is a little different, but one the deck absolutely needs. It gains 2 counters when a spell is activated, and it can then remove 2 counters from anywhere on the field to negate the activation of a monster effect and destroy it. This being a quick effect means you can use it on your opponent's turn, and that is just the icing on the cake. While going second is really what you want for this deck to enable the OTK, if you find yourself going first, this is the card you want out. Getting out 1 is not difficult with the help of another card I'll talk about soon, but getting out 2 is optimal as the monster effect only has a soft once per turn clause. I run 3 of the card as it brings a lot of versatility and negation to the table. Mythical Beast BASILSK is the next card to be discussed, as it synergizes well with the combo you get from Master Cerberus and Jackal King through its pendulum effect. This effect allows you to destroy it in order to shuffle a mythical beast in your extra deck except itself into the deck and draw 1 card. Its monster effect is a bit more situational, but still quite useful in many of those situations. Gaining only 1 counter per spell card, it can remove 3 counters to return a Pendulum Zone or extra deck Mythical Beast to the hand, although this does have a hard once per turn clause. As you've probably figured out by now, the Pendulum effect can be used to shuffle Jackal King back into the deck after the combo has been completed, giving you a Master Cerberus on field with 2 counters from BASILSK being activated while also netting you an extra draw. It's a combo that I've actually used quite a lot. The monster effect can come in use at times, as the pendulum effects can be stopped by the likes of an Ash Blossom or other hand traps that can leave you with dead scales, which this card can clear off of the field. It can also return a Master Cerberus or Jackal King from your extra deck to hand in order to set up for plays for the next turn if you don't get the OTK. I run 3 of BASILSK, but it can be lowered to 2 if you wish, as the card can be a little situational. However, in my mind, its usefulness when it's live cannot be overstated enough, and that's why I run as many as I do. Next is an interesting one-of in the deck, that being Mythical Beast MEDUSA, as its pendulum effect seems really out of place for a pendulum archetype. The effect is that you can revive a monster from the graveyard that a spell counter can be placed on, with the spell counter then being placed on that card. Its monster effect is also kind of situational, as it gains 1 counter when a spell is activated, and also has a quick effect that can halve the stats of any monster during either player's battle phase at the cost of 2 counters from your side of the field. So what business does a graveyard revival effect have on a monster that's part of a pendulum archetype? Well, there are a couple of instances in the deck where a monster could end up in the graveyard, plus the negation of a monster's summon can result in it being sent to the grave. Super situational, I know, but it's something to consider. Having said all of that, the monster effect has come in handy a number of times as an OTK enabler when coupled with a banishment from Master Cerberus, so the usefulness there does redeem the card somewhat. I run 1 for the instances where it is useful, but you could easily leave this card out if you wish. So, you know when your opponent pendulums out a bunch of really powerful monsters at once? Or how about when they've gone through intricate combos to get out their boss monster, the sole goal of that deck? Well, help is at hand with the Salt Factory that is Mythical Beast Garuda. While the pendulum effect is nothing special being an MST on legs, the monster effect of Garuda has produced some of the funniest and saltiest reactions I've seen from people in a long time. On top of gaining 1 counter per spell, its effect allows you to remove 3 counters from your field when your opponent normal or special summons a monster, which, in doing so, allows you to summon Garuda from the hand and return the summoned monsters back to your opponent's hand. Like I said, this deck prefers to go second. However, if you find yourself going first, you are going to need this guy in hand. Opponent summons a playstarter? Nope. How about a large pendulum summon?
How about no?
That's a nice boss monster you summon there. Be a shame if something happened to it. But I digress. I love this card for the reactions alone, but in all honesty, it's one of the better cards in the deck. It's always live in hand in one form or another, as having 3 counters on the field is stupid easy, and at worst, it's rank 4 fodder if you absolutely need it. Running 3 should be obvious, as running any less is doing a disservice to yourself and the deck. The final archetypal monster is actually one that you want in hand turn 1 on every game, that being Mythical Beast Jackal, because coming up with different names for every monster in an 8-card archetype was apparently too difficult for Konami. Its pendulum effect is meh, placing a counter on a monster upon destruction. However, its monster effect is really good for this deck. Getting 1 counter per spell, he can remove 3 from the field to destroy himself and then summon any Mythical Beast effect monster for the deck except itself. Why does it specify effect monster when they all have effects? Fucked if I know. But this effect is evidently pretty good. It aids in getting out double Master Cerberus for the OTK, or it can set up Jackal King for your opponent's next turn. Running 3 is a cornerstone of this deck, and opening him is always good to see. The only non-archetypal monster I run is ASTROGRAPH Sorcerer, and that's for one very good reason. Ignoring his pendulum effect since it means nothing in this deck, his monster effect, for those who don't know, triggers when a card you control is destroyed. If this happens, you can summon him to your field, then add one copy of that card if it was a monster, or a copy of any other monster destroyed this turn from your deck to your hand. There's also some Zark bullshit on the end, but we'll ignore that just as much as you should ignore the final 30 episodes of Arc V. This is a prime example of a non-archetypal card synergizing with the deck extremely well. Since all pendulum effects require them to be destroyed, this card not only gives you a 2500 body, it can set you up for further plays come the next turn if you need them. You want to be drawing into at least one of these in your starting hand, so I run 3. An argument can be made for lowering the number to 2 to prevent bricks and dead draws, but those were so few and far between for me that it really wasn't worth taking into consideration. And now we move on to the spells of the deck, as running traps in this deck is completely counterproductive. The first spell to discuss is Pendulum Paradox, a hard once per turn spell that allows you to add 2 pendulums with the same scale but different names from your extra deck to your hand. For whatever reason, I never considered this to be used in Mythical Beasts before. The effect is extremely useful in this deck, as there will always be at least a few monsters in the extra deck for this effect. Also, getting back your searchers or summoners for the next turn is extremely useful. I run 2 of this card, as it can be good as a play extender or a comeback card, but having said that, you also don't want a brick when drawing the card. Another spell that you want to run is the field spell Magical City of Endymion, along with terraforming to search it out. The field spell itself gains 1 counter when a spell is activated, as well as gaining any counters from cards that get destroyed on the field if they had counters on them at the time. However, Endymion has a couple of much more useful effects. Firstly, you can remove counters from the spell to activate effects that need spell counters to work, and it can also protect itself from destruction by removing a counter from itself instead. Endymion actually puts in a lot of work in this deck. Monsters getting destroyed by battle get their counters put on it, and beyond that, all of the Mythical Beast monsters can use the counters that are on Endymion to fuel their effects. Its protection effect is also really nice, and makes it just that bit harder for your opponent to whittle down your resources. Along with 3 copies of Terraforming, I run 2 copies of Endymion. Running 3 of them can be bricky, but you also want to get it on the field as soon as possible, which is why I run 3 of the Searcher. You're going to want to run 1 copy of Upstart for the draw power and counter production. And speaking of counters, Spell Power Grasp is another spell you want to run in the deck. Not only does it add a counter to a card on your field, but the activation of it also adds more counters. Additionally, it can add another copy of itself to use on your next turn, which aids in the deck's grind game. Now, this card is a bit of an interesting one. While it doesn't further your game state in a vacuum, it can also help other cards in doing just that. Because of this, I personally run 3 of the card, but this is a really subjective one, so it's up to you how many you run of it. The next spell is really 2 cards in one, that being Mythical Bestiary, a card that synergizes really well with Medusa's Pendulum effect, even though that effect of Medusa is rarely used. With Mythical Bestiary, its first effect makes you send 2 cards from the deck to the graveyard in order to place 2 counters on a card that can have those counters. However, instead you can set this card and get it destroyed by your opponent's card effect, which in turn triggers its second effect. This effect lets you summon a monster from the deck that you can place a spell counter on, and then place 2 counters on that card. However, you can only activate 1 of these cards per turn. If you have a bricky hand, this card will often be your saviour. Almost every time I have set this card, my opponent has destroyed it, thus allowing me to trigger the second effect. The initial effect also allows for potentially 4 counters to be placed onto a card like Master Cerberus, thus activating its inbuilt protection. Initially I ran this card at 2, but I've since upped it to 3 as the card is too good to be placed at any less of an amount in my opinion. Giving 4 counters and increasing field presence is fantastic for the deck, which is why I now run 3. You're also going to want to run 2 copies of Twin Twisters, as it gives you counters while also clearing back row and potentially setting up Medusa or getting rid of a dead card. Additionally, running 2 copies of Scapegoat allows in more counter generation, and it also helps in raising the deck's ceiling by giving it access to some link shenanigans. Both of these cards are definitely worth running in the deck. The last spell and the last card that's in the main deck that we need to cover is one that was suggested to me on my old deck profile for these guys, and that is the Power of the Guardians Equip spell. While it has some interesting lore implications, I think, the effect is actually pretty good. This card gets a spell counter when an attack is declared involving the equipped monster. Not only does that monster then gain 500 both ways for each counter, but you can actually remove a spell counter from anywhere on the field in order to protect the monster from any form of destruction. All round, just a really good card for the deck. Being an equip card really isn't an issue for once, and it really benefits the deck as a whole. Although most of the time you will want to put it on something like Master Cerberus or Jackal King, even equipping it to something like BASILSK can turn it into a very good beat up really quickly. I run 3 of them, but it's definitely a card to play around with. And now we come to the extra deck, and once again, this is about as toolbox as it gets, ladies and gentlemen. It's almost like that's what the extra deck is used for in main deck focused decks or something, I don't know. Anyway, once again, for Mythical Beasts, there is only a couple of monsters that you'll definitely be wanting to run. One of these guys is, quite unsurprisingly, Heavy Metal Foe's Electromite. While it is actually surprisingly situational in this deck, it still has its uses. Its first effect allows you to add a Pendulum monster from your deck to your extra deck face up if the card is link summoned. Then, you can destroy another monster you control to add a face-up Pendulum from the extra deck to your hand. Finally, if a card leaves your Pendulum zone, say by destroying itself to gain an effect, you get a free draw, although you can only use this effect once per turn. The card is actually really useful despite its situational nature. Since you lose the counters from the monsters used for the summon if they had any, and even if the field spell is active, this can make it detrimental to summon. However, being able to search any card in the archetype, then get it into your hand with the destruction of a single card is pretty useful, and the draw when a card is destroyed is fantastic. I run 2, although you can easily just run the 1 as you won't be using it all that often. Beyond that, you'll want to run some rank 4 staples since there are a lot of level 4s in the deck. Stuff like Castell or Baguska are good to be used for removal and stalling. Baguska in particular can give you a turn to set up further, especially when combined with cards like Master Cerberus and Jackal King already on the field. And the only other card that I would recommend running is Link Karibo. Being able to stop at least one monster's attack is good for some decent disruption and has never failed me in a pinch. Its revival effect also helps a lot for some additional disruption, and that's why I recommend running the 1 in the deck. But now, since the rest of the extra deck is pretty much up to you, that brings us to the next section of the video, tech choices. So let's go through and discuss what some of the options are for the deck. Starting with the rest of the extra deck, Tornado Dragon and Red Eyes Flare Metal, yes, he's making another appearance, do work well for various reasons in this deck. You can also use number 38 and Divine Dragon Knight Felgrand for some additional negations, as well as Naruto to accomplish the same thing. Utopia Beyond can be used to push for an OTK when accompanied by Master Cerberus, and Photon Strike Bouncer can be nice on the first turn to slow down the opponent. You can also look at some more situational links, such as Borolo Dragon or Decode Talker, with Skull Dread being another possible link you can use to either bring out a monster from your hand, or even reset your hand. They're definitely very situational, but they have their uses. The last extra deck monster that I would recommend is Thousand Eyes Restrict, along with Instant Fusion to bring him out. Not only will this generate counters with the spell card, but it will also provide some monster removal before going into Link Kuriboh using Thousand Eyes Restrict as material. Just something to think about. And as always, there are some main deck tech options you can look into when you decide to put this deck together. Since they're all spellcasters, the field spell Secret Village of the Spellcasters is good for stopping your opponent's spells, although bear in mind that this does counteract the counter generation effects. To aid in this counter generation, Dark Hole and Regeki can provide removal with the counter generation, and given how many 3-ofs there are in the deck, Pot of Desires can also be useful for draw power. Funnily enough, Dark Magic Veil works alright with these cards, as Jackal King, Jackal and Astrograph Sorcerer are all dark spellcasters. The spellbook engine is also good for draw power and counter generation, although it does use your normal summon that you'd ideally want to use for Jackal. You can also use Odd Eye's Pendulum Dragon as a searcher or battle damage negator, and it being a 4 scale means it's a target for Pendulum Paradox in the deck, while potentially you can also use Duelist Alliance to search out this card. Mythical Exemplar is an interesting tech choice for the deck. While it does eat your normal summon, it gains 2 counters when a spell is activated, and you can then remove those counters once per turn to summon a monster of the same level as the amount of removed counters from your hand or graveyard. This can actually be pretty useful, as Master Cerberus is a level 8 and Jackal King is a level 6, making them both summonable with this effect. Additionally, all other archetypal monsters besides Jackal are level 4, giving them synergy with this effect and potentially giving further rank 4 access. It's worth considering. Endymion, the Master Magician, can be summoned surprisingly easy in the deck. Since getting 6 counters onto the field spell isn't that hard, summoning him is pretty easy, and doing this also gives you the chance to get back a spell from your graveyard and back into your hand. The destruction effect is also pretty good, but the built-in summon condition and being rank 7 fodder do make it more useful. Now, the last card I want to point out is one that is absolutely goddamn hilarious to pull off, that being Megaton Magical Cannon. Being able to destroy everything your opponent controls for 10 counters is actually stupid easy to pull off, and the only reason I don't run it is because it is a massive brick in this deck. Still, just for the hilarity factor of pulling this off, I will occasionally chuck in 1 or 2 into the deck. And unfortunately, since there aren't many spell counter related cards, that's about it for the tech choices of the deck. If there's any other cards you think I may have missed, just let me know in the comment section below. But for now, let's move on to the final section of the video, the replays, where we will cover a number of duels that will highlight how the deck functions, plays, and interacts with different decks and situations. So as always, take it away, me. Thank you, me. We are going to jump straight into the replays, guys. I know it says we have 6 there, but we are only going to be viewing 3 of them today, just because of time constraints. We're going to jump in and we're going to watch number 3 first, then we're going to see number 6, and finally number 1, which is my favourite, which is why we're leaving it to last. So let's load this up. Now, as you can see, we are playing against Burning Abyss, and fortunately, we have a rather good starting hand. I believe my opponent, from memory, was playing with his IRL deck, which is why I went for Dante instead of Chernobyl. So as we can see here, straight away, we're able to get 3 counters onto Jackal because of Magical Boost's effect. You know, it gets 1 because the spell's activated, plays 2 on it, so automatically we're able to bring out a Master Cerberus. In this situation, we know that, you know, Burning Abyss don't play an overly large amount of hand traps, so we should be okay. However, we know that this, I mean, it is a Fog Blade, but we know, because again, it's Burning Abyss, that it most likely is. So we have to work on playing around that one. So we summon out the Master Cerberus first, but then we work on the Jackal to bring back out the original Jackal. BASILSK is able to shuffle that back, as I said, it's a nice little combo. And then we're also able to get our counters up from doing that. And then Jackal was able to, again, remove another 3 because it's not a hard once per turn, and we're able to get Jackal King out, which gives us that negation on board. We also have the Garuda in hand, which was a lucky draw, which basically means we're set up in case he summons a monster that we don't like on the next turn. So we activate the power of the Guardians because, again, we know that Master Cerberus is probably going to get negated here, which it is, you know, removing 4 spell counters from the field. But fortunately, we already have an extra 2 thanks to power of the Guardians, so we will have that negation. And even though Fogblade's going to activate and stop Master Cerberus, we can still attack over the Dante thanks to power of the Guardians, which is why I quite like running it at 3, because it just gives you the opportunity to just run over things when your main plays are negated. So he does some standard shenanigans, but we know here at this point, you know, activates reinforcement, but we know here that having searched Silent Boots, he's going to want to, he's probably got another Phantom Knights in hand, and we know that if we negate that summon, that he won't be able to then special summon Phantom Boots, you know, and go about doing his Exceed shenanigans. So that's what we're focused on here. So again, he summons that out. We use the Garuda straight away because we know that, you know, there's not much he can do besides that unless there's traps, and then, yep, straight away, we know that we've got him. We use the Garuda, again, fantastic top deck, if I say so myself, to use its MST on Legs effect to get rid of the Fog Blade. We then get to put 4 counters onto Master Cerberus thanks to its effect, as well as counters and everything else. We can remove that and then attack for game. So as you can see, that's pretty much how the deck works. You know, it focuses on that sort of jazz. You know, power of the Guardians again, coming in clutch to give us over the line there for the OTK. That's basically how the deck works. You know, just negation, stopping summons, and then just pushing for the OTK. If, you know, it's not on your first turn, then on your next one. So let's jump into the 6th replay, and this one I wanted to include because of the ridiculous amount of spell counters you get on the field. So again, looking at this hand, we got to think, okay, what don't we have? We have a Jackal on board, which is good. We have a Jackal King in hand, which is fantastic, and that means that the Master Cerberus is able to search out something we don't have already, which is the Basilisk, you know, resummon it. Then you also have the Astrograph Sorcerer, you know, just crazy combinations here. And then that can search us out another Master Cerberus for next turn. So we're already set up in that regard. You know, the Jackal King summons back out Master Cerberus. The Jackal is now going to get rid of the counters to summon out a Jackal King, because that gives us the negation that we want. We also have the Garuda in hand to stop summons. We're set up, basically. You know, Spell Paragraph in hand, ready for the next turn. Here we have 4 and 3 counters, so we got enough for protection and negation. He doesn't do that, however, but luckily we top deck into the Endymion, and we can see here that he decides to try and Effect Veil of the Master Cerberus. Effect Veil of the Master Cerberus so that, you know, he can't banish Twist Cobra, go for game. Fortunately, Jackal King doesn't care where the monster effect is activated, so it just negates that. You know, Master Cerberus gets its counters, you know, the counters build up. Unfortunately, we hit the Scapegoat instead of the Torrential Tribute, which would have been nicer. What can you do though, right? So does that. Cerberus, you know, able to hit itself again, search our Basilisk. We're just trying to build up counters at this point, because at this point I'm like, well, pretty sure we've got it, you know? And we have, you know? But have a look here. 1 counter, 16 counters, and 13 counters. 30 spell counters on the field on turn 3. What the hell? And we haven't even activated Spell Paragraph yet. So that just shows you how potent this deck is in terms of getting spell counters onto effect. That's why there's no reason to worry about not having spell counters available, just because it is so easy to get them on the field. And now we have the last replay, number 1. I love this one against Zephyr Yangzing Pendulums or something like that. They get to go first. You know, they do some standard shenanigans and whatnot. You know, Destrudo, nice or jazz, but Destrudo helps us out in the end. He ends on the Yazi. You know, can't be targeted, but has that recursion, obviously setting up for the following turn, which makes sense. You know, you have a 2600 beater on board, it can't be targeted. It's going to be pretty hard to OTK through that. So as we can see here, again, we got a good hand. You'd be surprised how often that happens. But Cerberus in hand and Jackal King in hand means that we only want to search out the last combo pieces, so either a Garuda or a Basilisk. Having Astrograph in hand means as well that, you know, we can summon him out, search out another Cerberus, Jackal King is then able to get out the Master Cerberus again, magical boost onto Master Cerberus to give it its effects. Jackal is then going to tag out for another Master Cerberus, because again, at this point we are trying to push for the OTK as best we can, so to speak. He summons out whatever it was, but we're able to push through it. He's got 1300 left. You know, Oracle Zephyr do his move, but here is where here is where Garuda comes in clutch. So he summons out 4 monsters, you know, clearly going for his big play, but we've got 12 counters on the field. So of course, what do? We just say no to the entire field. He still gets off effects that just activated, you know, when it's summoned. I think, what's this one? Yeah, so he still gets off the effects. Just because, you know, they're not negated if they have effects. But what can you do at that point? You know, you stopped the entire balance summons. We essentially stopped him for a turn. That's what Garuda does. It stops people for a turn. And at this point, you know, he wasn't able to get off destruction with Zephyr Thuban. So we're just able to attack for game at the end of that. So guys, I hope that showed you kind of how, you know, mythical beasts play. They are prone to disruption, obviously. And one thing I do want to add very quickly is that if you haven't tried them out already, try it with the Brandish engine. I know that I haven't said that in the video yet, but this is like sort of really post. I'm having to re-record this because there were some corrupt files and whatnot. So if you haven't looked at it yet, try the Brandish engine out, just because, you know, spells basically. Anyway, I shall give you back to myself and we shall wrap this video up. And that will bring this video to an end, guys. I do hope you enjoyed. If you did, please remember to leave a like on the video. Hit subscribe if you have got to this point in the video and you haven't done so already. Also follow me on Twitter. I'll leave a link in the description below. Like I said earlier, I plan on doing these once a month. Uni bidding, basically. So I'm hoping to keep that up. Next video will be on one that I've already mentioned, an archetype I already mentioned in the Dark Magician video, so keep an eye out for that. But until then, guys, this has been the Sage as always, signing out.